Yo, what is going on, Headliner Nation? Kyle back with the Fantasy Headliners. Week 2 is here, and I'm getting ready to drop some wide receiver start and sit knowledge for you. Thank you. Week 1 done. Lots of craziness there. Don't forget, we are no longer showing our accuracy percentages before each start and sit video because it is its own standalone video now where we go in depth over all the hits and misses from the week prior. So make sure you check out that what is happening video if you have, any questions about guys we hit on last week or who we didn't hit on. And then of course, talking about some of those studs that hit that thumbs down last week. But for this video, you got to hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you're new here to the Fantasy Headliners. And hey, let's jump right into the action. We got a great Thursday night matchup last week. We get another great one this week with the Los Angeles Chargers headed to Kansas City. Now, right now, we're still kind of monitoring Keenan Allen, but it does appear he will end up missing this week, or is more than likely to miss this week. If that happens, I'm not interested in another wide receiver outside of Mike Williams and Josh Palmer. Maybe Jalen Guyton gets out there and gets like a deep pass or something like that, but it's going to be Williams as my start this week. Kansas City allowed 25 fantasy points to wide receivers last week, but Williams is really going to be relied on. Now that Keenan Allen is out, I know we had a bad week from Williams last week. I think we're going to get that bounce back. We got to run him back out there and what is potentially going to be a pretty big time shootout. Palmer's going to be stepping in. I like him potentially stepping in. And right now the numbers do show him as a sit, but he will be a guy that we need to keep an eye on because even though he's a sit in this video, he's still only at 11 because of obviously that production not being there last week, with Keenan Allen still being on the field for a majority of the time. So we'll keep an eye on that. If you need like a wide receiver 3 this week, maybe Palmer wouldn't be that big of a stretch, but I do think we're going to see the tight end Gerald Everett kind of really get going this week. So I'm a little bit more on him than going after like a Palmer or a Guyton this week. And for the Kansas City Chiefs, Juju will be the volume guy. And then kind of after that, MVS and Hardman. I think there's going to be some weeks where they're there, where they're not there, maybe some big weeks, some absolute downers, but really, honestly, I'm only looking to them in really, really good matchups. And this matchup is not good enough for me. Chargers did allow 30 fantasy points last week to wide receivers, but it's not good enough for me to kind of risk it, especially on Thursday night football. I think for now, we're just relying on Juju Smith-Schuster. Going to get that volume, going to get those targets, and hopefully those volume numbers and those targets numbers start to even out a little bit. And we get a guy that is giving you the volume and the production on a weekly basis. It seems like it's the same old song and dance with Baltimore. Every year, they have issues with injuries to begin the season. Baltimore now losing cornerback Kyle Fuller, coming off a week in which they allowed 31 fantasy points to the Jets. Now, they kept him out of the end zone, but they did end up between the 3 of them and a couple of other guys mixed in. They did allow a lot of receptions and a lot of yards. They just never ended up finding the end zone. Had they found the end zone with a wide receiver, those 31 fantasy points would have been much, much higher. Tua showed us this last week. He's taken the next step. He is ready. He is the guy. He supplied Hill and Waddle both. Plus, kind of the good thing for Hill and Waddle is that there was almost no targets to tight ends, and Chase Edmonds only got 4 targets. So these 2 are the guys, and in a matchup against Baltimore now, give me both of these guys as starts this week. Miami only allowed a few fantasy points to New England wide receivers. It wasn't a whole lot, but it was just New England. It wasn't that great. They didn't play that well, and those wide receivers aren't anything to really write home about. For me, Bateman's definitely going to be a start this week, but look at the difference in production and volume. It was one big play that made Bateman's week last week. Now, is every week going to be like that? I don't think so. Bateman's going to get going. Last week was a little bit of a tougher matchup. He was able to break some coverage, and he was able to score a big-time touchdown, but we need that production and that volume number to get closer together to make sure that he is going to be a guy that is a more easy start moving forward and someone that isn't going to be big play dependent. Bateman's ceiling is going to be low because it could end up being a tough matchup with Xavier Howard. But again, just one big play could end up making it. So he is a start, but he's only a 16. So he is a high risk start for me this week. Duvernay is an interesting option. He's not a start for me this week, but when they go to 3 wide receiver sets, he goes into the slot. and he's kind of a mismatch in the slot. I like that potential for him. We're going to continue to keep an eye on them. Again, this could end up being a little bit of a tougher matchup for Rashad Bateman. So if we can get Duvernay into the slot a little bit more, it could open up some opportunities. But I think a lot of those opportunities are going to be scoring related. He's not going to have a whole lot of volume, so he would have to score. And if he doesn't score, he's probably not going to be good in your lineup. New York Jets at the Cleveland Browns, Elijah Moore, Corey Davis. When they're in two wide receiver sets, Wilson is going to the outside, which really caught me off guard because I thought Wilson was going to be going into the slot, and that's not what happened. So that is very interesting for Elijah Moore because I like that for him. I think he is a mismatch nightmare when they've got three wide receivers on the field in the slot. He's a tougher wide receiver. He is a guy that's going to bully a lot of those nickel corners and some linebackers. So that could end up being very, very good for Elijah Moore owners moving down the rest of the season. Now, Anderson took the top off last week for Carolina going up against Cleveland. And this week, Elijah Moore, I think, potentially could end up doing the same. I've got him listed as a start this week along with Corey Davis. I think both of these guys could end up seeing enough volume to make them fantasy viable. Elijah Moore for me is really going to be probably more dependent on a big play here or there, but I think that opportunity is going to be a lot more present for him than it would be for Corey Davis. Now, for the Browns, the Jets gave up 35 fantasy points to wide receivers last week, but really it was only on 3 plays. I mentioned it a minute ago talking against Baltimore. It was 2 touchdowns to Duvernay, and it was that 1 big touchdown to Bateman. Outside of those 3 plays, the Jets really shut down the entire passing game for Baltimore last week. Even Mark Andrews had a tough time last week. So just keep that in mind. You know, Donovan Peoples-Jones, he was the guy last week, and he would be the big play guy, okay? So in this matchup, he's coming in as an 18. He's just a little bit higher than Amari Cooper because, again, that production and volume number from last week were significantly better than what it was for Cooper. I mean, DPJ was one of the leaders last week among everybody in the NFL in targets. So they were really looking his way. But we're not giving up on Amari Cooper. And why is that? Because if you watch the film, the dude was open all the time. I mean, it was absolutely insane to see how much he was open last week and never got targets on those plays. That's going to end up coming with Jacoby Brissett. Don't worry about it. But this situation still needs to play out for me a little bit, though. Is David Njoku going to get more involved? Is DPJ kind of come down from those targets last week? And we see Amari Cooper come back out. So if you're starting either of these guys, unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit more on the volatile side. But going up against the New York Jets, I think, again, with that big play potential, because we saw Bateman get loose on the Jets last week and Duvernay get loose on the Jets last week for a couple of scores. DBJ, his volume and Cooper's volume, or their production this week, is really made up on hoping they find that one big play. Washington heading into Detroit this weekend, though, even though Detroit gave up a ton of yards to A.J. Brown last week, that's because A.J. Brown is a grown man. I mean, A.J. Brown, listen, he's a lot more of a physical wide receiver than what we see on this Washington team right now. But one thing to keep in mind about Philly last week, they did not score through the air, and Jeff Okudah allowed 0 receptions on 4 targets to Devontae Smith. He had him locked down. Maybe Okudah's starting to show why they used a high draft pick on him. Wentz and company, they did look good last week, but McLaurin is not the same type of physical wide receiver that A.J. Brown is. So his day is probably not going to be as big as what we saw A.J. Brown last week. Plus, I think Detroit does a much better job getting after the quarterback this week. If you were watching the game last week, they were in the backfield with Jalen Hurts. They were doing a good job of helping try and shut down some of the wide receivers, but Hurts is just so darn quick and fast, like he was just able to get away. Wentz is not going to be the same way. So I think Samuel's going to be the guy this week. Some decent targets to McLaurin, basically making him kind of one of those fringe starters. But I think we see some nice little dump offs occur to Samuel. And Jahan Dotson coming off a really good week last week. I don't know if they're going to have enough time to really wait on him to make those drives down the field. Now, for the Detroit Lions, like let's just be honest here. That offense looked good last week. And I think going up against Washington, they're also going to have a good week. DJ Chark and Amon-Ra St. Brown both getting lots of volume last week. Both of them scoring. And that's going to lead me to my prize picks. prop of the week. That's going to be Amon-Ra St. Brown, 57.5 yards over on Prize Picks, and I'm taking the over, baby. I think we're going to see a really great performance from Amon-Ra St. Brown. This is an offense that's doing a good job of establishing the run, staying balanced, and when they do, they're throwing defenses off. And I do believe that Philly's defense is better than what Washington has, and Detroit, if they're doing that against a good team like the Philadelphia Eagles, kind of excited to see what they're going to do this week against Washington. Indianapolis at Jacksonville, and give me all the Michael Pittman I can get this week. He might be like my wide receiver one. Okay, maybe not wide receiver one, but he's a top 5 wide receiver for me this week. Jacksonville allowed 44 fantasy points last week to wide receivers, the second most that week. And then also, Pittman's coming off a huge week. He's the number 1 target in this offense. It's a great matchup. Give me all the Michael Pittman that I can possibly get. Now, for the other guys, we'll see if Matt Ryan can get them going, but this offense as a whole is going to have to just kind of continue to gel a little bit with a new quarterback there. Now, for the Jacksonville Jags, even though Indy didn't get the win last week, they did shut down Houston's wide receivers. I mean, Brandon Cooks, he did have 82 yards, but other than that, there was nothing. Houston had to use, 2 touchdowns to O.J. Howard, to really kind of push that game to where they did. So not a whole lot given up to wide receivers last week by Indianapolis, but Kirk is going to be my only start this week. He's going to be a low confidence start. It is a tough matchup, but if you're throwing the ball 40 plus times a game, the opportunity is there. So Christian Kirk is more of like a wide receiver 3 for me this week, knowing that the upside might not be available to him. Tampa Bay at Nolans this week. And New Orleans only allowed 20 fantasy points last week to wide receivers, but it was Atlanta. And yeah, it's Atlanta. Still, could be a tough matchup in the secondary. And really, Mike Evans is the only guy that I'm going to trust right now. We know that there's been some battles between Mike Evans and the New Orleans Saints. So we'll see who can get the better of him this week. But that's why he's still about a 16. So he's a guy that's more of like a wide receiver 2 for me this week in terms of my confidence in his start. Jones could be a low-key flex play. He could be a low-end flex play for me. But the Falcons last week, they ran the ball, okay? They ran the ball at New Orleans. And I think we're going to see Tampa Bay do the same thing. I think we're going to see a lot of Leonard Fournette on the ground, pound the ball right at New Orleans, make them stop the run, and then take advantage of that with some of the wide receiver plays. So I think the volume could be a little bit lower this week, even though there could be some good plays here or there. So if Julio Jones were to score a touchdown this week, would it surprise me? No, and it probably makes him really close to end up being a start. That's why I'm saying, like, if you need a low-end flex play, maybe you take a look at Julio Jones, but it's going to be super risky. Now, on the New Orleans side, I'm still waiting to see if Michael Thomas is going to, just take a few weeks to get back to being himself. Yes, he scored 2 touchdowns. No, he did not look like his former self at times, okay? When you watch some of the tape, it did look like he was just lacking some of that explosiveness out of his cuts, out of his routes that he used to have. He did go up and get the football a couple of times, but it wasn't the same type of, it wasn't the same Michael Thomas. So I'm just waiting to see, hey, is he still bothered by the ankle? Is it still just that hamstring injury that really kind of limited him in training camp? I'm still waiting to see that, but he will be a start this week based on the volume last week. You've got to go that way. Landry's still the wide receiver 1 for me on this team right now because I do believe that he will continue to see the most volume. But in this matchup against Tampa Bay, it's going to be a tough one. So both of these guys would be low-end starts for me. Carolina and the New York Giants. The Giants only allowed 20 fantasy points to Titans wide receivers last week, but those aren't the Titans of the past. They've got some guys that, coming off injury, have been banged up this offseason. It's not the same explosive offense we've seen in the past. And plus, Derrick Henry didn't do much either. So the one thing I'm going to do is I'm not going to just kind of overreact. Okay, I'm not going to overreact at this point. I am being cautious with Anderson this week, because the volume was there with Mayfield, but was it there because he was trying to push the ball down the field? Was it there because he was trying to show up his former team? Are we going to see a little bit of a change to the offense this week to stay a little bit more balanced? That's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. Plus, Robbie Anderson gets a Dory Jackson this week, which is going to be a tough matchup. So again, he's coming out as a 19 right now, but a lot of that has to do with all the volume he got last week, and we need to respect the fact that Baker Mayfield was looking his way so much, so we're going to give him credit for that, but I am still going to be very, very cautious starting him this week. DJ Moore for me, I think is going to be a little bit of a safer bet this week, even though his numbers don't show it overall because of the lower volume and production last week. I am giving him a 4 in the X Factor area, which leads me to believe, and the reason I'm giving him that there is because I do think he's going to be kind of the mismatch guy that we look towards. It's going to be a little bit easier to find than what Adoree Jackson might allow against Robbie Anderson. Now, for the New York Giants, I mean, they are a mess. Okay, they are a mess. And going up against Carolina last week, Donovan Peoples-Jones did have 60 receiving yards, but there was no other wide receiver that was over 20. And I don't even know what's going on with the New York Giants. Golladay looked awful. Tony isn't even playing. And Shep's on his way back from an injury and had one big play last week. Shep's the only one I would consider. And I'm not starting him either. New England at Pittsburgh, and Pittsburgh allowed 41 fantasy points to the Cincinnati wide receivers last week, but let's be real. That's a much different beast than what New England is. No. Listen, for New England, Parker leaves the list this week because Nelson Aguilar was looked at way more than he was last week. This could be, this could end up being a good matchup, but Pittsburgh caused a lot of turnovers against Cincinnati last week. And Myers really is the only guy that I'm going to trust, and it's really not by much. If Pittsburgh defense plays the way it did last week, now obviously, TJ Watt banged up right now and injured. Does that cause a whole lot of a difference? I still think Pittsburgh comes out to play against New England. Getting an opportunity to make New England 0-2 to start the year. At home, I think Pittsburgh's going to come out and ready to play. I think this is a really tough matchup. Jacoby Myers might see enough targets to be an okay wide receiver 3, but I don't think the upside is going to be there. On the flip side, though, for New England, I mean, they were lit up by Hill and Waddle last week. They were absolutely lit up. So Deontay Johnson and Chase Claypool, they're both going to be starts for me. Chase Claypool, a little bit on the lower end of the confidence level, but Deontay Johnson is a guy that I'm running out just fine. Decent matchup this week based on those numbers. The volume was there for both Claypool and Deontay Johnson, but production really wasn't. So be ready for a lower ceiling, but Deontay Johnson is a guy based on the volume alone I'm running out this week. Atlanta at the Los Angeles Rams, and the Rams are really going to be looking to get back to it this week, right? Embarrassed on both sides of the balls last week. Balls? What? That sounds like a Manscaped promotion. This is going to be my Manscaped must-watch matchup of the week. I am keeping an eye on this matchup very closely because, like I kind of said a second ago, the Rams were embarrassed on both sides of the ball last week. And because of that, I'm keeping a close eye on this. But for Manscaped.com, make sure you head over to Manscaped.com, use code word headliners at checkout, 20% off your entire purchase and free shipping. Both of these teams gave up production through the air last week. Now let's see if it was an off week or if these defenses really are going to have some issues, because I thought both of these defenses were going to be good, good this season, and really they didn't look great last week. I would normally say that it's a good thing that Kyle Pitts will probably end up being covered a majority of the day by Jalen Ramsey. But Jalen Ramsey sucked last week. So is it really going to be that good of a thing? Because, hey, that was going to leave potential for Drake London to be open a little bit more often. But London is still going to be a high-risk start for me, seeing as how this defense could bounce back, and it could bounce back in a big way. The Atlanta Falcons and the Buffalo Bills are nothing alike, okay? So I'm not really taking last week's numbers and just saying automatically, hey, Atlanta's going to blow up. Now, for the Los Angeles Rams, we know Kupp is obviously going to be a start. Don't forget about Allen Robinson, though. Please don't, because last year, over the first couple of weeks of the season, it looked like Robert Woods had been lost, that he wasn't being paying attention to, and everyone was like, what's going on with Robert Woods? But then weeks 4 through 9 came, and over the course of that time, Robert Woods was the wide receiver 6. We are going to see Allen Robinson bounce back. Maybe we don't start him this week because you don't want to take another 0 or you don't want to take another bad performance and you want to see it happen. But it's coming. Don't give up. Seattle at San Francisco, and the ceiling with Geno Smith just is not going to be there for the Seahawks wide receivers, but Metcalf could see plenty of targets, which would make him a safe wide receiver 3. I'll take another shot on DK Metcalf because they're going to be throwing the ball. I think the offense for San Francisco is going to look a lot better this week, and we can't really take what happened in Chicago last week and use that as our baseline because that was an awful storm. If you've seen the video, like the upper deck was even flooding. Like how much does it have to rain to flood the upper deck in a football stadium? That is how much rain that they were getting. So Debo's through the roof for me this week because he's going to kind of go back to that role we saw last week or last season where he took a lot of plays at running back because of Elijah Mitchell being hurt. And unfortunately, Mitchell is hurt again. So Debo through the roof for me. Now, Ayuk is going to be listed as a sit here, but do not give up on him. The reason that he is a sit is because the production and volume were so bad last week. But again, that was an awful matchup and an awful weather. This week, going up against Seattle, could be a little bit better. I think Ayuk takes a little bit of a step forward, even though it might not be a huge ceiling play this week. He takes a little bit of a step forward, and then this is a guy that we start again going forward in week 3. Cincinnati at Dallas, and Dallas is a mess. Dallas is a mess. Now, Higgins is going to be listed as a sit here because he's not cleared the concussion protocol as of yet. He still potentially could do it, and we're going to continue to monitor that. But if there's no Higgins, Chase and Boyd could end up having a field day, and I'm really excited to see Chase just absolutely run all over Trayvon Diggs because it's going to happen. It's going to happen, ladies and gentlemen. But Boyd, I like him as kind of a low-end wide receiver to start this week. Jamar Chase has got a lot of upside as well. CeeDee Lamb. He's the only guy that I'm going to take a look at, and we can barely trust him right now, so why would we even talk about any of the other wide receivers? But you got to run Lamb out there. The confidence is low. Don't expect too much, but you got to run him out there because you are not sitting your second overall pick the second week of the season. You got to trust that Dallas will hopefully put him in a position to win and give you some fantasy points. Houston at Denver, and the Denver secondary last week, was it good or did Seattle just not force the issue? We're going to continue to monitor that. Only really big plays they gave up last week were to the tight ends. Volume galore for Brandon Cooks, and that's why he's definitely going to be a start for me. But what does it turn into production-wise? Because again, notice the numbers. Volume-wise was a 5 for Cooks, meaning that he was top 12 at the position of being targeted last week. But he was only a 3 in production, which means he was kind of middle of the road. That's one of those things where we got to see that volume and production start to match up for us to really reach that ceiling. And Houston was ripped apart by Pittman last week, so do I expect anything less from Sutton and Jeudy? Absolutely not. Jeudy had a huge week last week. Absolutely deserved it. Sutton was kind of my go-to guy in this offense. I told you last week that the opportunity there was for Jeudy, but we needed to see it. Well, guess what? Jeudy showed it to me, and Jeudy said, Kyle, take your sip and shove it up your Arizona at Las Vegas. And the only guy I'm trusting for Arizona this week is Hollywood Brown. We will check in on Rondell Moore a little bit later on in the week, nursing an injury right now. We'll see what happens. But Hollywood is the only guy that I'm going to this week. And let's face it, that offense is going to need to start looking a lot better really, really quick. For the Las Vegas Raiders, knowing how bad the Cardinals looked last week, we're 100% rolling out Davante Adams, but we're also going to give Hunter Renfrow another opportunity as well. This is going to be a huge week for Davante Adams, but it's going to be an even bigger week for Hunter Renfrow because this is where we really find out how does Renfrow work into this offense. Last week it was Adams, a little bit of Waller. Is Renfrow going to be the number 3 guy all season long, or are we going to see him take advantage of some mismatches? Chicago at Green Bay, and Green Bay was destroyed by Justin Jefferson last week, but it's not the same thing, right? Okay, Chicago, Minnesota are not the same thing. Now, here's the one thing I will say, though. I am much more excited about starting Darnell Mooney, knowing that he got 12 snaps in the slot last week, which led the team. No other wide receiver saw more than 2. Darnell Mooney is staying in the slot, and if you watched my sit video last week, I brought up that exact point. Where are we going to see him go to? Well, we saw him stay in the slot. That's great. He gets to stay away from Jair Alexander. I like his opportunity this week. Now, this is the first real look at the Chicago defense we're going to get because of the weather last week. Now, Green Bay might have some weather coming in as well. We'll keep an eye on that throughout the week. But Dobbs continues to, kind of be the guy that's getting the longest look right now in terms of rookies. But Watson dropped a for sure touchdown last week, and that really, really hurt him, and we know how Aaron Rodgers thinks. Lazard will likely try to work his way back. Knowing how bad Green Bay looked last week, I expect Allen Lazard to really do everything he can to get back. But I don't want to start anyone right now. We got to see if Lazard gets back. We're seeing them spread it around a lot. Randall Cobb even got targets last week. A.J. Dillon was really used in the passing game. Is Aaron Jones going to get worked into the passing game a little bit this week? There is a lot that we have to see about Green Bay still. Another primetime game for the Buffalo Bills, Sunday Night Football. Tennessee's wide receivers didn't look great last week, but that's to be expected. Derrick Henry didn't have that great of a day. Robert Woods' first game since his injury. Treylon Burks has been banged up this offseason. So for all of these guys, there's still going to be a sit again because, that Buffalo Bills defense, yes, they gave up a lot to Cooper Kupp last week, but that's Cooper Kupp. They shut everybody else down. So I am concerned about these wide receivers this week. I need to see how it plays out, who continues to establish themselves. I think Woods is going to end up being fine, and I think Burks is going to end up being fine as well, but they need to shake the rust off and get going a little bit. But we're not going to shake the rust off with them in our starting lineup against Buffalo. That's not going to happen. All three of these guys are getting targets, and toss in some Jamison Crowder as well. So Diggs and Davis, we're starting them no matter what. You own them, you put them in your lineup. But McKenzie's going to go back to being a sit this week because of how much we saw Jamison Crowder get worked into the slot as well last week. Minnesota and Philadelphia on Monday Night Football, not Sunday Night Football, but on Monday Night Football, and we get to watch Justin Jefferson in prime time. Absolutely love it. Almost 200 receiving yards against the Packers last week, and now he gets Philadelphia, who let Amon-Ra St. Brown and DJ Chark put up good numbers on him. So I expect some really good Justin Jefferson numbers this week. Maddox in the slot typically does a pretty good job, but Amon-Ra, no, he showed him up this past week. So Adam Thielen, I'm going to get back to him as a start this week. I think it's a good matchup. I think Adam Thielen, I think there's going to be a little extra attention to Justin Jefferson, which hopefully will leave Adam Thielen open in the middle of the field a little bit and possibly for a touchdown. Now for the Philadelphia Eagles, Brown is going to get push targets over and over and over and over and over and over. We know we thought that could potentially happen, but that's not good for Devontae Smith. It's not, because if we're not looking at Devontae Smith, then he's absolutely on the waiver wire. Get rid of him. Drop him off your team. Let's give it another week to see what happens. I think we're going to see a lot of volume go to A.J. Brown once again. But are they going to try to even it out a little bit more and let Devontae Smith potentially win some of their matchups as well? But ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Week 2 start and sit analysis for wide receivers in the books. Hit the like button for me. Subscribe to the channel if you're new here. And in the comments down below, let me know what matchup you are most excited to watch. Everybody have a great rest of your week. Peace out. Stay safe and healthy, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Fantasy Headliners.